Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. Poland and Hungary have long described each other as close allies bound by history and shared political instincts, but Russia's war in Ukraine and divisions over relations with Moscow have put that partnership under real strain. Now, signals from President Nawrocki suggest Warsaw may be rethinking how it engages with Budapest. Joining us today on TVP World to assess whether this marks a meaningful shift or a symbolic gesture is Aleks Szczerbiak, a professor of politics and department head at the University of Sussex. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello, it's very good to be back. Thanks for inviting me.
So, first of all, how should we understand the current state of Poland-Hungary relations? Are they being rebuilt or are they fundamentally diverging?
I think that the government is not very happy that Mr. Nawrocki has engaged in this initiative with Hungary. I think it says that you shouldn't be building such close relations with someone who's so closely aligned with Vladimir Putin, that it's undermining EU unity, that it's unconstitutional that he's pursuing a kind of an independent foreign policy, and that he's actually getting involved in an election campaign, because there's an election coming up in Hungary at the weekend. Mr. Nawrocki, on the other hand, his supporters would say that, well, Mr. Tusk himself has got involved in the election campaign by supporting Mr. Orban's opponent, that what he's doing is actually just a normal diplomatic visit. And that there are also issues where Poland and Hungary need to cooperate very closely together. They're close allies on issues like the Mercosur trade agreement, on EU climate policy, EU migration policy. So I think the president's got a bit of a dilemma. I mean, on the one hand, Poland and Hungary clearly have very different approaches to the war in Ukraine and how relations with Mr. Putin should be conducted. Mr. Nawrocki himself has made it clear he continues to think that Mr. Putin is a war criminal and that he continues to back Ukraine strongly. On the other hand, there's a difficult balancing act here, because he does want to rebuild Central and East European cooperation. And the key to that, for Mr. Nawrocki and for his political formation, or a key role in that, has always been Poland and Hungary working very closely together in a bilateral relationship, and also as part of what's called the Visegrad Four. So it's quite a difficult balancing act he has to perform here, but it's clear he wants to take a bit of a chance and try and play some kind of role in rebuilding those relations.
Right. When it comes to that relation, how much of it you think is about bilateral ties, or do you think that there's also an attempt at rebuilding sort of a broader conservative axis in Central Europe?
Yes, I think that there is certainly, the latter is certainly evident in that. I mean, Law and Justice, the party that was the previous government and is the party that Mr. Nawrocki is aligned with, has long thought that that Poland needed to build alternative alliances to the Franco-German axis, to the kind of the European mainstream, or the EU political establishment. And the key to that is building closer links with post-communist states, with other Central and East European countries. And within that, a critical role would be played by the Visegrad Four, and with the Polish-Hungarian alliance absolutely critical to that. Obviously, that's fallen apart, or fell apart, after Russia invaded Ukraine, and the Law and Justice and Mr. Orban took rather different positions on how to respond to this. But I think that this is clearly an attempt to try and pragmatically see if there are ways that this can be rebuilt in spite of those differences. So I think it's more than just, I mean, although obviously the pretext for this is the Polish-Hungarian Day of Friendship. I mean, that's why Mr. Nawrocki had his meeting with the Hungarian president earlier today. That's why he's gone to Budapest. But I think there is a big, as you say, I think there is a bigger context here, which is trying to rebuild that Polish-Hungarian axis as the basis for a broader set of alliances with Central and East European states that are more sympathetic to the agenda that Mr. Nawrocki is putting forward.
Do you think there's also an element of this outreach being driven by the institutional rivalry with Donald Tusk's government?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that Mr. Tusk and Mr. Nawrocki are absolutely sworn bitter enemies. I mean, Mr. Nawrocki has made it clear he wants to undermine the government. He wants Law and Justice to replace them in 2027. The government has made it clear that it wants to limit Mr. Nawrocki's role as much as possible, particularly in terms of foreign affairs. So I think the bigger context here, which is the ongoing rivalry over all kinds of issues, and in particular over the issue to what extent does the president actually have any say in foreign policy, or is this solely the domain of the government, is at the core of this. I think that's a key to understanding why there's controversy over this visit. Is that ongoing rivalry, difficult cohabitation between Mr. Tusk's government and Mr. Nawrocki's presidency, with foreign policy a key battlefront over this.
Right. Of course, there's a lot of political calculations behind it, which is all well and good, but the timing is also sensitive as well. Like you mentioned, after Russia's invasion of Ukraine and Orban's close alliance, or at least friendliness to the Moscow regime, it does seem like it's going to cause a rift in that relation between Poland and Hungary as well. At this critical moment, what does Poland stand to gain from closer ties with Hungary when Budapest is increasingly isolated within Europe?
Well, that's very much the line that the government is putting forward. I think they're arguing that this is a huge political mistake. I mean, what does, as you say, what does Poland get from this? Identifying itself with a country that's isolated within the EU, and actually, arguably, with a prime minister who could well not be in office by the end of the week. Mr. Nawrocki, I think, is playing a bit of a longer game here. I think he's trying to. Obviously, there's a bit of a gamble here in terms of what's going to happen with the election, but I think that he's sort of thinking beyond that specific issue of Ukraine. I think he makes it absolutely clear that he takes a very, very different position on this. But I think he's thinking beyond this to a point where he's looking at building alliances with a kind of a longer term view. Where if the right does return to office, it's going to need allies on issues where it is out of step with the EU political establishment. And let's not forget, when Law and Justice was in office, Hungary, although they disagreed about lots of issues, including the approach to Mr. Putin, was a very reliable ally for the Law and Justice government. There were occasions when, for example, unanimity was needed against Poland when the European Commission was trying to introduce measures against Law and Justice government for its alleged violations of rule of law. And the fact that Hungary was able to block this, I mean, other countries were also sympathetic to Poland, but Hungary was the only country that was kind of openly supportive of Poland and made it clear it would block any attempts to introduce such measures against Poland, was very, very important. So I think he's playing a long game here. I think he's looking at regional cooperation, bilateral links as something that's important, laying the ground for a possible return to office by Law and Justice, and an ally that it will need, whatever its differences on the Ukraine issue and whatever its differences on assessments of Mr. Putin. And these are very substantial. They have very, very strong differences on this, but he's willing to put this to one side, playing a pragmatic, long-term game.
Right. Do you think there's an attempt by Nawrocki to try to separate the friendship with Hungary from Orban's Russia policy, or do you think that the distinction is practically impossible to sustain?
Again, I think this is the argument that the government is using, that effectively, whatever Mr. Nawrocki might try and do, de facto, by going to Budapest, by having this meeting with him, he's effectively being seen to kind of act in a hypocritical way, the government would say. I mean, he boycotted a meeting with Mr. Orban before Christmas because of the links with Russia. Now, he seems to be going back on that. I mean, that's certainly the government's position. Mr. Nawrocki, however, is trying to very much pursue this kind of, dual strategy. He's going overboard. In the meeting he had with the Hungarian president this morning, he's really trying to emphasize that, nothing is different as far as his approach to Ukraine is concerned. Let's not forget, Mr. Nawrocki actually has an international arrest warrant out against him by Moscow. This is a person who is no friend of Vladimir Putin, and I think we should take at face value the fact that he wants Ukraine to win the war, or certainly for Russia not to get any kind of strategic objectives fulfilled as a result of the peace. But that's the risk I think he's taking. I think that, it might be, he's got very clear boundaries between these two issues. It's very much a dual strategy. On the one hand, you have this approach to Ukraine where they have clear differences. On the other hand, there are these issues where Poland and Hungary, he believes, should work together. They are allies on EU issues. They both want to see assert their country's sovereignty against the EU political establishment. The risk, of course, is that it could be interpreted in the way that the government is putting forward, but it's clearly a risk he's prepared to take.
Right, definitely a very risky move indeed. We'll have to see if that pays off. But in the meantime, thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it, and thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure.
And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.